Chapter 7. Confirmation, Holy Orders, and Matrimony. Celibacy considered under its moral aspect. In considering the period of life which religion has fixed for the nuptials of man and his Creator, we find a subject of perpetual wonder. At the time when the fire of the passions is about to be kindled in the heart and the mind is sufficiently capable of knowing God, he becomes the ruling spirit of the youth, pervading all the faculties of his soul in its now restless and expanded state. But dangers multiply as he advances. A stranger cast without experience upon the perilous ways of the world, he has need of additional helps. At this crisis, religion does not forget her child. She has her reinforcements in reserve. Confirmation will support his trembling steps like the staff in the hands of the traveler, or like those scepters which passed from race to race among the royal families of antiquity, and on which Evander and Nestor, pastors of men, reclined while judging their people. Let it be observed that all the morality of life is implied in the sacrament of confirmation, because whoever has the courage to confess God will necessarily practice virtue, as the commission of crime is nothing but the denial of the Creator. The same wise spirit has been displayed in placing the sacraments of the holy orders and matrimony immediately after that of confirmation. The child has now become a man, and religion, that watched over him with tender solicitude in the state of nature, will not abandon him in the social sphere. How profound are the views of the Christian legislator! He has established only two social sacraments, if we may be allowed this expression, because in reality there are but two states in life, celibacy and marriage. Thus, without regard to the civil distinctions invented by our short-sighted reason, Jesus Christ divided society into two classes and decreed for them not political but moral laws, acting in this respect in accordance with all antiquity. The old sages of the East, who have acquired such a widespread fame, did not call men together at random to hatch utopian constitutions. They were venerable solitaries who had traveled much, and who celebrated with the lyre the remembrance of the gods, laden with the rich treasure of information derived from their intercourse with foreign nations, and still richer by the virtues which they practiced. Those excellent men appeared before the multitude with a lute in hand, their hoary locks encircled with a golden crown, and seating themselves under the shade of the plane tree, they delivered their lessons to an enchanted crowd. What were the institutions of an Amphion, a Cadmus, an Orpheus? They consisted in delightful music called law in the dance and hymn, and consecrated tree. They were exhibited in youth under the guidance of old age, and matrimonial faith plighted near a grave. Religion and God were everywhere. Such are the scenes which Christianity also exhibits, but with much stronger claims to our admiration. Principles, however, are always a subject of disagreement among men, and the wisest institutions have met with opposition. Thus, in modern times, the vow of celibacy which accompanies the reception of holy orders has been denounced in no measured terms. Some, availing themselves of every means of assailing religion, have imagined that they placed her in opposition to herself by contrasting her present discipline with the ancient practice of the Church, which, according to them, permitted the marriage of the clergy. Others have been content with making the chastity of the priesthood the object of their raillery. Let us examine first the views of those who have assailed it with seriousness and on the ground of morality. By the 7th canon of the Second Council of Lateran, held in 1139, the celibacy of the clergy was definitely established in accordance with the regulations of previous synods, as those of Lateran in 1123, Trosley in 909, Triber in 895, Toledo in 633, and Chalcedon in 451. Baronius shows that clerical celibacy was enforced generally from the 6th century. The First Council of Tours excommunicated any priest, deacon, or subdeacon who returned to his wife after the reception of holy orders. From the time of St. Paul, virginity was considered the more perfect state for a Christian. But were we to admit that marriage was allowed among the clergy in the early ages of the Church, which cannot be shown either from history or from ecclesiastical legislation, it would not follow that it would be expedient at the present day. Such an innovation would be at variance with the manners of our times, and moreover would lead to the total subversion of ecclesiastical discipline. In the primitive days of religion, a period of combats and triumphs, the followers of Christianity, comparatively few in number and adorned with every virtue, lived fraternally together, and shared the same joys and the same tribulations at the table of the Lord. We may conceive, therefore, that a minister of religion might, strictly speaking, have been permitted to have a family amid this perfect society, which was already the domestic circle for him. His own children, forming a part of his flock, would not have diverted him from the attentions due to the remainder of his charge, nor would they have exposed him to betray the confidence of the sinner, since in those days there were no crimes to be concealed, the confession of them being made publicly, in those basilisks of the dead, where the faithful assembled to pray over the ashes of the martyrs. The Christians of that age had received from heaven a spirit which we have lost. They formed not so much a popular assembly as a community of Levites and religious women. Baptism had made them all priests and confessors of Jesus Christ. St. Justin the philosopher, in his first apology, has given us an admirable description of the Christian life in those times. We are accused, he says, of disturbing the tranquillity of the state, while we are taught by one of the principal articles of our faith that nothing is hidden to the eye of God, and that he will one day take a strict account of our good and evil deeds. But, O powerful Emperor, the very punishments which you have decreed against us only tend to confirm us in our religion, because all this persecution was predicted by our Master, the Son of the Sovereign God, Father and Lord of the universe. On Sunday, those who reside in the town and country meet together. The Scriptures are read, after which one of the ancients exhorts the people to imitate the beautiful examples that have been placed before them. The assembly then rises, prayer is again offered up, and water, bread, and wine being presented, the officiating minister gives thanks, the others answering Amen. A portion of the consecrated elements is now distributed, and the rest is conveyed by the deacons to those who are absent. A collection is taken, the rich giving according to their disposition. These alms are placed in the hands of the minister for the assistance of widows, orphans, sick persons, prisoners, poor people, strangers. In short, all who are in need and in the care of whom devolves especially upon the minister. We assemble on Sunday because on that day God created the world, and the same day his Son arose to life again to confirm his disciples in the doctrine which we have exposed to you. If you find this doctrine good, show your respect for it. If not, reject it. But do not condemn to punish those who commit no crime. For we declare to you that, if you continue to act unjustly, you will not escape the judgment of God. For the rest, whatever be our faith, we desire only that the will of God be done. We might have claimed your favorable regard in consequence of the letter of your father, Caesar Adrian, of illustrious and glorious memory. But we have preferred to rely solely upon the justice of our cause. The apology of Justin was well calculated to take the world by surprise, for it proclaimed a golden age in the midst of a corrupt generation, and pointed out a new people in the catacombs of an ancient empire. The Christian life must have appeared the more admirable in the public eye, as such perfection had never before been known, harmonizing with nature and the laws, and on the other hand forming a remarkable contrast with the rest of society. It is also invested with an interest which is not to be found in the fabulous excellence of antiquity, because the latter is always depicted in a state of happiness, while the former presents itself through the charms of adversity. It is not amid the foliage of the woods or at the side of the fountain that virtue exerts her greatest power, but under the shade of the prison wall or amid rivers of blood and tears. How divine does religion appear to us, when in the recess of the catacomb, or in the silent darkness of the tomb, we behold a pastor who is surrounded by danger, celebrating by the feeble glare of his lamp, and in presence of his little flock, the mysteries of a persecuted God. We have deemed it necessary to establish incontestably this higher moral character of the first Christians, in order to show that if the marriage of the clergy was considered unbecoming in that age of purity, it would be altogether impossible to introduce it at the present day. When the number of Christians increased, and morality was weakened with the diffusion of mankind, how could the priest devote himself at the same time to his family and to the church? How could he have continued chaste with a spouse who had ceased to be so? If our opponents object the practice of Protestant countries, we will observe that it has been necessary in those countries to abolish a great portion of the external worship of religion, that a Protestant minister appears in the church scarcely 2 or 3 times a week, that almost all spiritual relations have ceased between him and his flock, and that very often he is a mere man of the world. As to certain puritanical sects that affect an evangelical simplicity and wish to have a religion without a worship, we hope that they will be passed over in silence. Finally, in those countries where the marriage of the clergy is allowed, the confession of sin, which is the most admirable of moral institutions, has been, and must necessarily have been, discontinued. It cannot be supposed that the Christian would confide the secrets of his heart to a man who has already made a woman the depository of his own, and he would, with reason, fear to make a confidant of him who has proved faithless to God, and has repudiated the Creator to espouse the creature. We will now answer the objection drawn from the general law of population. It seems to us that one of the first natural laws that required abrogation at the commencement of the Christian era was that which encouraged population beyond a certain limit. The age of Jesus Christ was not that of Abraham. The latter appeared at a time when innocence prevailed and the earth was but sparsely inhabited. Jesus Christ, on the contrary, came into the midst of a world that was corrupt and thickly settled. Continence, therefore, may be allowed to woman. The second Eve, in curing the evils that had fallen upon the first, has brought down virginity from heaven, to give us an idea of the purity and joy which preceded the primeval pangs of maternity. The legislator of the Christian world was born of a virgin, and died a virgin. Did he not wish thereby to teach us, in a political and natural point of view, that the earth had received its complement of inhabitants, and that the ratio of generation, far from being extended, should be restricted? In support of this opinion, we may remark that states never perish from a want, but from an excess of population. The barbarians of the north spread devastation over the globe when their forests became overcrowded, and Switzerland has been compelled to transfer a portion of her industrious inhabitants to other countries, as she pours forth her abundant streams to render them productive. Though the number of laborers has been greatly diminished in France, the cultivation of the soil was never more flourishing than at the present time. Alas, we resemble a swarm of insects buzzing around a cup of wormwood, into which a few drops of honey have accidentally fallen. We devour each other as soon as our numbers begin to crowd the spot that we occupy. By a still greater misfortune, the more we increase, the more land we require to satisfy our wants. And as this space is always diminishing, while the passions are extending their sway, the most frightful revolutions must, sooner or later, be the consequence. Theories, however, have little weight in the presence of facts. Europe is far from being a desert, though the Catholic clergy with her boarders have taken the vow of celibacy. Even monasteries are favorable to society by the good management of the religious, who distribute their commodities at home, and thus afford abundant relief to the poor. Where but in the neighborhood of some rich abbey did we once behold in France the comfortably dressed husbandmen and laboring people whose joyful countenances betoken their happy condition? Large possessions always produce this effect in the hands of wise and resident proprietors, and such precisely was the character of our monastic domains. But this subject would lead us too far. We shall return to it in treating of the religious orders. We will remark, however, that the clergy have been favorable to the increase of population by preaching concord and union between man and wife, checking the progress of libertinism, and visiting with the denunciations of the Church the crimes which the people of the cities directed to the diminution of the children. There can be no doubt that every great nation has need of men who, separated from the rest of mankind, invested with some august character, and free from the encumbrances of wife, children, and other worldly affairs, may labor effectually for the advancement of knowledge, the improvement of morals, and the relief of human suffering. What wonders have not our priests and religious accomplished in these three respects for the good of society? But place them in charge of a family. Would not the learning and charity which they have consecrated to their country be turned to the profit of their relatives? Happy indeed if by this change their virtue were not transformed into vice. Having disposed of the objections which moralists urge against clerical celibacy, we shall endeavor to answer those of the poets. But for this purpose it will be necessary to employ other arguments, to adduce other authorities, and to write in a different style. Chapter 9. The same subject continued. Holy Orders. Most of the sages of antiquity led a life of celibacy, and the gymnosophists, the Brahmins, and the Druids held chastity in the highest honor. Even among the savage tribes it is invested with a heavenly character, because in all ages and countries there has prevailed but one opinion respecting the excellence of virginity. Among the ancients, priests and priestesses who were supposed to commune intimately with heaven were obliged to live as solitaries, and the least violation of their vows was visited with a signal punishment. They offered in sacrifice only the heifer that had never been a mother. The loftiest and most attractive characters in mythology were virgins. Such were Venus, Urania, and Minerva, goddesses of genius and wisdom and friendship, who was represented as a young maiden. Virginity herself was personified as the moon, and paraded her mysterious modesty amid the refreshing atmosphere of night. Virginity is not less amiable considered in its various other relations. In the three departments of nature it is the source of grace and the perfection of beauty. The poets, whom we are now seeking to convince, will readily admit what we say. Do they not themselves introduce everywhere the idea of virginity as lending a charm to their descriptions and representations? Do they not find it in the forest scene and in the vernal rose and the winter snow? And do they not thus station it at the two extremities of life, on the lips of childhood and the gray locks of aged men? Do they not also blend it with the mysteries of the tomb, telling us of antiquity that consecrated to the main seedless trees, because death is barren, or because in the next life there is no distinction of sex and the soul is an immortal virgin? Finally, do they not tell us that the irrational animals which approach the nearest to human intelligence are those devoted to chastity? Do we not seem, in fact, to recognize in the beehive the model of those monasteries where vestals are busily engaged in extracting a celestial honey from the flowers of virtue? In the fine arts, virginity is again the charm, and the muses owe it to their perpetual youth. But it displays its excellence chiefly in man. St. Ambrose has composed 3 treatises on virginity, in which he has scattered with a profuse hand the ornaments of style, his object, as he informs us, being to gain the attention of virgins by the sweetness of his words. He terms virginity an exemption from every stain, and shows that the tranquillity which attends it is far superior to the cares of matrimonial life. He addresses the virgin in these words: "The modesty which tinges your cheeks renders you exceedingly beautiful. Retired far from the sight of men, like the rose in some solitary spot, your charms form not the subject of their false surmises. Nevertheless, you are still a competitor for the prize of beauty, not that indeed which falls under the eye, but the beauty of virtue, that beauty which no sickness can disfigure, no age can diminish, and not death itself can take away. God alone is the umpire in this rivalry of virgins, because he loves the beautiful soul, even in a body that is deformed. A virgin is the gift of heaven, and the joy of her family. She exercises under the paternal roof the priesthood of chastity. She is a victim daily immolated for her mother at the altar of filial piety. In man, virginity assumes the character of sublimity. When, in the fierce rebellion of the passions, it resists the invitation to evil, it becomes a celestial virtue. A chaste heart, says St. Bernard, is by virtue what an angel is by nature. There is more felicity in the purity of the angel, but there is more courage in that of the man. In the religious, virginity transforms itself into humanity. Witness the fathers of the redemption and the orders of hospitallers, consecrated to the relief of human misery. The learned man it inspires with the love of study, the hermit with that of contemplation, and all it is a powerful principle, whose beneficial influence is always felt in the labors of the mind, and hence it is the most excellent quality of life, since it imparts fresh vigor to the soul, which is the nobler part of our nature. But if chastity is necessary in any state, it is chiefly so in the service of the divinity. God, as Plato observes, is the true standard of things, and we should make every effort to resemble him. He who ministers at his altar is more strictly obliged to this than others. The question here, says St. Chrysostom, is not the government of an empire or the command of an army, but the performance of functions that require an angelic virtue. The soul of the priest should be purer than the rays of the sun. The Christian minister, adds St. Jerome, is the interpreter between God and man. The priest, therefore, must be a divine personage. An air of holiness and mystery should surround him. Retired within the sacred gloom of the temple, let him be heard without being perceived by those without. Let his voice, solemn, grave, and religious, announce the prophetic word, or chant the hymn of peace in the holy recesses of the tabernacle. Let his visits among men be transient, and if he appear amid the bustle of the world, let it be only to render a service to the unhappy. It is on these conditions that the priest will enjoy the respect and confidence of his people, but he will soon forfeit both if he be seen in the halls of the rich, if he be encumbered with a wife, if he be too familiar in society, if he betrays faults which are condemned in the world, or if he lead those around him to suspect for a moment that he is a man like other men. Chastity in old age is something superhuman. Priam, ancient as Mount Ida, and hoary as the oak of Gargarus, surrounded in his palace by his 50 sons, presents a noble type of paternity. But Plato, without wife and children, seated on the steps of a temple at the extremity of a cape lashed by the waves, and there lecturing to his disciples on the existence of God, exhibits a far more elevated character. He belongs not to the earth. He seems to be one of those spirits or higher intelligences of whom he speaks in his writings. Thus, virginity, ascending from the last link in the chain of beings up to man, soon passes from man to the angels, and from the angels to God, in whom it is absorbed. God reigns in a glory unique, inimitable in the eternal firmament as the sun. His image shines with unequaled splendor in the visible heavens. We may conclude that poets and men even of the most refined taste can make no reasonable objection to the celibacy of the priesthood, since virginity is among the cherished recollections of the past, is one of the charms of friendship, is associated with the solemn thought of the tomb, with the innocence of childhood, with the enchantment of youth, with the charity of the religious, with the sanctity of the priest and of old age, and with the divinity in the angels and in God himself. Chapter 10. Same subject continued, matrimony. Europe owes also to Christianity the few good laws which it possesses. There is not perhaps a single contingency in civil affairs for which provision has not been made by the canon law, the fruit of the experience of 15 centuries, and of the genius of the Innocents and the Gregories. The wisest emperors and the kings as Charlemagne and Alfred the Great were of opinion that they could not do better than to introduce into the civil code a part of this ecclesiastical code which contains the essence of the Levitical law, the gospel, and the Roman jurisprudence. What an edifice is the Church of Christ! How vast, how wonderful! In elevating marriage to the dignity of a sacrament, Jesus Christ has shown us in the first place the great symbol of his union with the Church. When we consider that matrimony is the axis on which the whole social economy revolves, can we suppose it to be ever sufficiently sacred, or too highly admire the wisdom of him who has stamped it with the seal of religion? The Church has made every provision for so important a step in life. She has determined the degrees of relationship within which matrimony is allowable. The canon law, which determines the degree of consanguinity by the number of generations from the parent stock, has forbidden marriage within the fourth generation, while the civil law, following a double mode of computation, formerly prohibited only within the second degree. Such was the Arcadian law as inserted into the Institutes of Justinian. But the Church, with her accustomed wisdom, has been governed in this by the gradual improvement of popular manners. In the first ages of Christianity, marriage was forbidden within the seventh degree of consanguinity, and some councils, as that of Toledo in the 6th century, prohibited without exception all alliances between members of the same family. The spirit that dictated these laws is worthy of the pure religion which we profess. The pagan world was far from imitating this chastity of the Christian people. At Rome, marriage was permitted between cousin german, and Claudius, in order to marry Agrippina, enacted a law which allowed an uncle to form an alliance with his niece. By the law of Solon, a brother could marry his sister by the mother's side. The Church, however, did not confine her precautions to the above-mentioned legislation. For some time she followed the Levitical law in regard to those who were related by affinity, but subsequently she numbered among them the nullifying impediments of marriage, all the degrees of affinity corresponding to the degrees of consanguinity, within which marriage is prohibited. She also provided for a case which had escaped the notice of all previous jurisprudence, that of a man guilty of illicit intercourse with a woman. According to the discipline of the Church, this man cannot marry any woman who is related within the second degree to the object of his unlawful love. This law, which had existed to a certain extent in the early ages of Christianity, became a settled point by a decree of the Council of Trent, and was considered so wise an enactment that the French Code, though it rejected the Council as a whole, willingly adopted this particular canon. The numerous impediments to marriage between relatives which the Church has established, besides being founded on moral and spiritual considerations, have a beneficial tendency in a political point of view, by encouraging the division of property and preventing all the wealth of a state from accumulating in a long series of years in the hands of a few individuals. The Church has retained the ceremony of betrothing, which may be traced to a remote antiquity. We are informed by Aulus Gellius that it was known among the people of Latium, it was adopted by the Romans, and was customary among the Greeks. It was honored under the Old Covenant, and in the New, Joseph was betrothed to Mary. The intention of this custom is to allow the bride and bridegroom time to become acquainted with each other previously to their union. In our rural hamlets, the ceremony of betrothing was still witnessed with its ancient graces. On a beautiful morning in the month of August, a young peasant repaired to the farmhouse of his future father-in-law to join his intended bride. Two musicians reminding you of the minstrels of old led the way, playing tunes of the days of chivalry or the hymns of pilgrims. Departed ages issuing from their Gothic tombs seemed to accompany the village youth with their ancient manners and their ancient recollections. The priest pronounced the accustomed benediction over the bride, who deposited upon the altar a distaff adorned with ribbons. The company then returned to the farmhouse. The lord and lady of the manor, the clergyman of the parish, and the village justice placed themselves, with the young couple, the husbandmen, and the matrons, round a table upon which were served the Eumonian boar and the fatted calf of the patriarchs. The festivities concluded with a dance in the neighboring barn. The daughter of the lord of the manor took the bridegroom for her partner, while the spectators were seated upon the newly harvested sheaves, forcibly reminded of the daughters of Jethro, the reapers of Boaz, and the nuptials of Jacob and Rachel. The betrothing is followed by the publication of the banns. This excellent custom, unknown to antiquity, is altogether of ecclesiastical institution. It dates from a period anterior to the 14th century, as it is mentioned in a decretal of Innocent III, who enacted it as a general law of the Council of Lateran. It was renewed by the Tridentine Synod, and has since been established in France. The design of this practice is to prevent clandestine unions and to discover the impediments to marriage that may exist between the contracting parties. But at length the Christian marriage approaches. It comes attended by a very different ceremonial from that which accompanied the betrothing. Its pace is grave and solemn. Its rites are silent and august. Man is apprised that he now enters upon a new career. The words of the nuptial blessing, words which God himself pronounced over the first couple in the world, fill the husband with profound awe, while they announce to him that he is performing the most important act of life, that, like Adam, he is about to become the head of a family, and to take upon himself the whole burden of humanity. The wife receives a caution equally impressive. The image of pleasure vanishes before that of her duties. A voice seems to issue from the altar, and to address her in these words: "Knowest thou, O Eve, what thou art doing? Knowest thou that there is no longer any liberty for thee but that of the tomb? Knowest thou what it is to bear in thy mortal womb an immortal being formed in the image of God?" Among the ancients, the hymeneal rites were a ceremony replete with licentiousness and clamorous mirth, which suggested none of the serious reflections that marriage inspires. Christianity alone has restored its dignity. Religion also, discovering before the philosophy the proportion in which the two sexes are born, first decreed that a man should have but one wife, and that their union should be indissoluble till death. Divorce is unknown in the Catholic Church except among some minor nations of Illyria, who were formerly subject to the Venetian government, and who follow the Greek rite. If the passions of men have revolted against this law, if they have not perceived the confusion which divorce introduces into the family by disturbing the order of succession, by alienating the paternal affections, by corrupting the heart and converting marriage into a civil prostitution, we cannot hope that the few words which we have to offer will produce any effect. Without entering deeply into the subject, we shall merely observe that if by divorce you think to promote the happiness of the married couple, and this is now the main argument, you lie under a strange mistake. That man who has not been the comfort of a first wife, who cannot attach himself to the virginal heart and his first maternity of his lawful spouse, who has not been able to bend his passions to the domestic yoke, or to confine his heart to the nuptial couch, that man will never confer felicity on a second wife. Neither will he himself be a gainer by the exchange. What he takes for differences of temper between himself and the wife to whom he is united is but the impulse of an inconstant disposition and the restlessness of desire. Habit and length of time are more necessary to happiness, and even to love, than may be imagined. A man is not happy in the object of his attachment till he has passed many days, and above all, many days of adversity in her company. They ought to be acquainted with the most secret recesses of each other's soul. The mysterious veil with which husband and wife were covered in the primitive church must be lifted up in its folds for them, while to the eye of others it remains impenetrable. What, for the slightest pretense or caprice, must I be liable to lose my partner and my children, and renounce the pleasing hope of passing my old age in the bosom of my family? Let me not be told that this apprehension will oblige me to be a better husband. No, we become attached to that good only of which we are certain, and set but little value on a possession of which we are likely to be deprived. Let us not give to matrimony the wings of lawless love. Let us not transform a sacred reality into a fleeting phantom. There is something which will again destroy your happiness and your transient connections. You will be pursued by remorse. You will be continually comparing one wife with another, her whom you have lost with her whom you have found, and believe me, the balance will always be in favor of the former. Thus has God formed the heart of man. This disturbance of one sentiment by another will poison all your pleasures. When you fondly caress your new child, you will think of that which you have forsaken. If you press your wife to your heart will tell you that it is not the bosom of the first. Everything tends to unity in man. He is not happy if he divides his affections, and like God, in whose image he was created, his soul incessantly seeks to concentrate in one point the past, the present, and the future. These are the remarks which we had to offer on the sacraments of holy orders and matrimony. As to the images which they suggest to the mind, we deem it unnecessary to present them. Where is the imagination that cannot picture to itself the priest bidding adieu to the joys of life, that he may devote himself to the cause of humanity? Or the maiden consecrating herself to the silence of retirement, that she might find the silent repose of her heart? Or the betrothed couple appearing at the altar of religion to vow to each other an undying love? The wife of a Christian is not a mere mortal. She is an extraordinary, a mysterious, and angelic being. She is flesh of her husband's flesh and bone of his bone. By his union with her, he only takes back a portion of his substance. His soul, as well as his body, is imperfect without his wife. He possesses strength. She has beauty. He opposes the enemy in arms. He cultivates the soil of his country. But he enters not into domestic details. He has need of a wife to prepare his repast and his bed. He encounters afflictions, and the partner of his nights is there to soothe them. His days are clouded by adversity, but on his couch he meets with a chaste embrace and forgets all his sorrows. Without woman he would be rude, unpolished, solitary. Woman suspends around him the flowers of life, like those honeysuckles of the forest, which adorn the trunk of the oak with their perfumed garlands. Finally, the Christian husband and his wife live and die together. Together they rear the issue of their union. Together they return to dust, and together they again meet beyond the confines of the tomb to part no more. Chapter 11. Extreme Unction. But it is in sight of that tomb, silent vestibule of another world, that Christianity displays all its sublimity. If most of the ancient religions consecrated the ashes of the dead, none ever thought of preparing the soul for that unknown country, from whose bourne no traveler returns. Come and witness the most interesting spectacle that earth can exhibit. Come and see the faithful Christian expire. He has ceased to be a creature of this world. He no longer belongs to his native country. All connection between him and society is at an end. For him, the calculations of time have closed, and he has already begun to date from the great era of eternity. A priest, seated at his pillow, administers consolation. This minister of God cheers the dying man with the bright prospect of immortality, and that sublime scene which all antiquity exhibited but once, in the last moments of its most eminent philosopher, is daily renewed on the humble palate of the meanest Christian that expires. At length the decisive moment arrives. A sacrament opened to this just man the gates of the world. A sacrament is about to close them. Religion rocked him in the cradle of life, and now her sweet song and maternal hand will lull him to sleep in the cradle of death. She prepares the baptism of his second birth, but mark, she employs not water. She anoints him with oil, emblem of celestial incorruptibility. The liberating sacrament gradually loosens the Christian's bonds. His soul, nearly set free from the body, is almost visible in his countenance. Already he hears the concerts of the seraphim. Already he prepares to speed his flight to those heavenly regions where hope, the daughter of virtue and of death, invites him. Meanwhile, the angel of peace, descending toward this righteous man, touches with a golden scepter his weary eyes and closes them deliciously to the light. He dies, yet his last sigh was inaudible. He expires, yet long after he is no more, his friends keep silent watch around his couch, under the impression that he only slumbers. So gently did this Christian pass from earth. This is the end of Book 1, Part 1 of The Genius of Christianity by Chateaubriand. Thank you for listening.